Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Kylee Cast. Thanks so much for tuning in. I am Kylee Griswold, managing editor at The Federalist. Please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're just listening to the show, be sure to go check out the full video version on my personal YouTube channel or the Federalist channel on Rumble. And then like and subscribe there too. If you'd like to email the show, you can do so at radio@thefederalist.com. I always love to hear from you. It has been quite a week. Enraging, frustrating, heavy, dark, infuriating, all of the above. On a Saturday last July in Butler, Pennsylvania, President Donald Trump was less than an inch away from being assassinated. And in that moment and the following weeks, conservatives learned how many of our fellow Americans would celebrate the murder of our president. Well, fast forward to the past week, and we've learned just how many people would celebrate the killing of us. Because even though there will only ever be one Charlie Kirk, he was truly irreplaceable, there are millions of Americans who believe the same thing. And now, Democrats and the corporate media and even pathetic Republicans like James Lankford are calling for unity and for us to lower the temperature and for both sides to stop political violence. But we all know this isn't a both sides issue. This is a radical left issue, and it's an increasingly mainstream Democrat Party issue. Before Charlie Kirk's body was even cold, Democrats and the corporate media were armed and ready to trot out their typical talking points of widespread, institutionalized Republican, conservative, right-wing violence. It was like on cue. It was immediate. Look, I shouldn't even have to say this. Of course, there are instances of right-wing violence. There will always be instances of violence. It's human nature. It's a problem that is ever present with us as long as we're on this earth. But to pretend that it is a party-wide problem or something that is mainstream or encouraged or incited regularly is just absolute bunk. And you know that it's bunk because the examples that they immediately trot out are a complete joke. The first thing they'll point to is Governor Josh Shapiro's house being set on fire. But we know that doesn't count because it was carried out by a pro-Palestine protester, which, in case you didn't know, that's not a Republican Party position. That belongs to factions of the Democrat Party. Then they'll talk about the kidnapping plot for Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. But we know that was really a Fednapping plot. It was all just part of an FBI entrapment scheme. It was not organic right-wing violence. Then they'll talk about the assassinations of Democrat Melissa Hortman and her husband. And of course, horrible, horrible situation. But this was clearly the work of a random nut job, a guy who had a random pro-choice hit list, but also had things that said no kings in his car. So he's clearly just a lunatic. I challenge you to find one person, and specifically somebody on the right, who cheered at the assassination of this woman and her husband. Nobody did. Absolutely nobody. And it certainly was not part of some coordinated effort on the right to terrorize Democrats. Of course it wasn't. And then they'll point to the Paul Pelosi attack, which again was just carried out by a deranged conspiracy theorist, not a conservative. And then, of course, they'll talk about January 6th, which has not only been heavily exaggerated by Democrats and the lying media, but it also pales in comparison to the months-long rioting and looting of federal buildings and small businesses by the left that caused billions of dollars in damage. And need I remind you that it was mainstream Democrats and lawmakers and Kamala Harris who bailed out violent rioters and encouraged this kind of rioting in the streets. Meanwhile, the list of left-wing violence is long, it's growing, and it is justified and celebrated by thousands of Democrats, including people in positions of power. I already mentioned, but you had the Black Lives Matter riots, which ravaged the country throughout 2020. You have regular Antifa violence. You have the Zizian trans murder cult. You have the Covenant school shooting, the Annunciation school shooting, 2 Trump assassination attempts, the Charlie Kirk assassination, the attempted Brett Kavanaugh assassination. You have attacks on ICE agents. You have vandalism of random Teslas because people hate Elon Musk. You have the tearing down of monuments and the desecration of Charlie Kirk memorials, firebombing of pro-life pregnancy centers, church shootings, attacks on police, the punch-a-turf rhetoric, and I could go on. Peachy Keenan made a great point in The Federalist this week that it's just an accepted fact that you cannot safely wear a MAGA hat or fly a Trump flag in a blue city. A Trump bumper sticker is likely to get your car keyed, and you're just asking to be attacked by advertising your conservative political beliefs. That's just not the case for people who publicly support Hillary Clinton or Kamala Harris. If you wear a Kamala shirt in a red state, You're probably just going to have people roll their eyes at you. That's the worst that's going to happen. And why is that? That's because this is a left-wing problem, and it's part of a playbook that repeats itself over and over and over again. Democrats and the media incite violence, activists within their ranks carry it out, and then the same Democrats and media make excuses for the violence or just straight up lie about it, like saying the Charlie Kirk shooter was MAGA, or that we can't possibly know a motive. Maybe it was somebody firing celebratory shots in the crowd. That was legitimately a theory. And then these Democrats and the media blame Republicans and call for us to turn down the temperature. This happens every single time. But we all know it's Democrats and the Democrat media and the Democrat echo chamber and academia that create this atmosphere. Charlie Kirk died because of evil and lies from one side. End of story. And they have absolutely no intent of stopping those lies. Just look at the justifications and the equivocating and the deflecting and the excusing from the likes of Katie Tur at MSNBC or Abby Phillips at CNN or Matt Gutman at ABC. It's nonstop. For crying out loud, when law enforcement released the texts between the alleged assassin and his trans-identifying lover, texts which look almost more like a pre-planned script to absolve the trans boyfriend of involvement, but who knows? Matt Gutman of ABC called the texts, quote, very touching and characterized them as loving. This is the depths of the media filth. And it is not just coming from the fringes, and it's not just coming from the media. This is mainstreamed in the party. And I'm seeing it online from people I know in real life. And I'm sure you are too. It's so mainstreamed and accepted among Democrats that even former President Joe Biden got up when he was president and gave a speech about the soul of the nation that smeared Trump voters, aka more than half the country, and people who want to make America great again, which should be a good thing. He characterized these people as extremists who are a clear and present danger to democracy. And yeah, these Democrats will pay lip service to condemning violence, but in the very next breath, they smear their ideological opponents as Nazis, fascists, racist, bigots, oppressors, just about the worst things a person can be. It is also very Marxist, and it's extremely irresponsible and dangerous. When you view your political opponents as literally Hitler and believe that speech is violence, then it's only logical that you'll use legitimate violence to counter that speech. And who wouldn't be fine with taking out a mass murderer like Adolf Hitler? You know, I've spent the past week trying to figure out how to channel my sadness and anger productively. And I will say I've been very, very encouraged by the spiritual stirring that's happening in our country. I've seen it not only online, just tons of videos of people saying, I went to church for the first time, or I bought a Bible for the first time, or I've never prayed before, but I'm learning how now. I've seen it not only online, but I've also seen it in my own personal life. We know that Charlie Kirk wasn't just assassinated, he was martyred. And you can tell that because his death is having at least as many effects spiritually as his life. And I think it's jolted a lot of Christians into action. It's underscored the need to share the gospel. There's an urgency here. And these are all really, really positive things. But we also need to figure out how to practically move forward in a country where 1 in 4 young Americans and 1 in 4 Democrats feel comfortable admitting in a poll that they think the country is better off with Charlie Kirk murdered. These are not people that anybody should be unifying with or brushing aside with ridiculous both-sidism. This is a serious, serious problem. So, as a Christian, I know I'm supposed to forgive as Christ forgave me. And I'm also supposed to love my enemies. In the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5, Jesus says, quote, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." These are the words of Jesus. This is all true. But notice that Jesus says, love your enemies. That means you have enemies. In Paul's letter to the Ephesians, he talks about putting on the armor of God to stand against evil. And he's careful to note that the armor is not to fight against flesh and blood. We're not putting on the helmet and picking up the sword to fight against other people. We're doing it to fight against spiritual forces of evil, Satan and his hosts. But that doesn't mean we don't have earthly enemies. Not people we fight with weapons, but people we do indeed identify as enemies. Yes, we pray for them. We pray for their salvation. And yes, we love them with Christian love. But we also need to be realistic about who they are. And not only that, but whose they are. Anyone who is not in Christ is of this world, and they belong to their father, the devil. When Jesus sends out the 12 apostles to go and preach the gospel, he says, Quote, "Behold, I am sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. So be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Beware of men, for they will deliver you over to courts and flog you in their synagogues, and you will be dragged before governors and kings for my sake, to bear witness before them and the Gentiles. When they deliver you over, do not be anxious how you are to speak or what you are to say, for what you are to say will be given to you in that hour. For it is not you who speak, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. Brother will deliver brother over to death, and the father his child, and children will rise up against parents and have them put to death. And you will be hated by all for my name's sake. But the one who endures to the end will be saved." End quote. So he's very clear here. You are sheep in the midst of wolves. Be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. And Christians tend to be really good, especially in moments like this, at emphasizing the latter part of that verse, which is why I think we're seeing so many calls for unity right now. But we don't just need to be as harmless as doves. We need to be wise as serpents. And that means remembering who the ultimate enemy is and warring against him, but also identifying who is on his side. Love them, pray for them, evangelize them, but do not treat them as friends. Be wise as serpents. They are indeed enemies. All right, everybody. I am so excited to be joined today by my colleague and friend, Eddie Scarry. He is the DC columnist at the Federalist, and he's also most recently the author of a brand new book called Traitors: The Democrat Party's Collapse into Anti-American Filth. Boy, what a title. I am so excited to read the rest of the book. I started reading it, but I'm pumped to read the rest. Eddie, thanks so much for being here with me today.
Of course, the honor of a lifetime.
Yeah, well, we don't get to see each other nearly often enough. So this is truly a pleasure. I love seeing my colleagues on these little weekly formats that we get to. So, Eddie, like I said, pumped to finish reading the book, but can you just give watchers, listeners, an overview of like the general themes of the book? I mean, it's right there in the title, but let us know, why should they read it? What's it about?
Yeah, so honestly, if you were to take a giant grab bag of any topic, any news topic, any controversy over the course of the last, I would say specifically the last 2 to 3 years, but even going back for sure the last decade, just take your pick of the issue, whether it's immigration, crime, the economy, election integrity, anything. You can take any single one of those and you take it out. You look at both sides. Well, what's the Democrat position? What's the Republican position? What are the arguments that either side is making? And time again, and increasingly so, it has just become Democrats take the anti-American position. And I know that that's supposed to be a thing where you cannot say that there is a definitive way to be an American in this country. There are definitive principles we have, customs we have, norms we have. But there are definitive norms. There's
Mhm.
definitely ways to be a real and true American and stand by the principles we have in this country. And you can point them out. And you, again, take any one issue. Crime. Democrats, they have an endless list of excuses for why, if they're not just outright denying that there is a crime problem in their cities and their precincts, where they have the DAs, where they have the attorneys general, where they have the mayors, the council
Mhm.
members. They always have the rampant crime, and they
Right.
defend it when they're not lying about that it is a problem. They defend it. They explain why that's an issue that can't be addressed. You look at immigration. We have an immigration problem, and a lot of it has to do with finite resources, public resources in the country. They will lie about it, say it's not a problem, and if you're able to prove that it demonstrably is a problem, they will tell you why it can't be fixed, why the obvious solutions are not the real solutions. And it's making this country worse. It's making us weaker. It's making Americans worse off. In
Mhm.
particular, particularly in Democrat-run places, it's their people who are really suffering the greater share of the burden for this. So that's why I talk about it, the collapse into anti-American filth.
Yeah, that's a great point. And they're also actively doing things. It's not just throwing up their hands and saying there's nothing we can do about it. It's like, downgrading specific crimes so that it's no longer as bad of a crime if you steal anything that's less than $900 or whatever, or things
Mhm.
like that, or like actively working against border security instead of just refusing to fund it. Like Kamala Harris needs to find the root causes of the border crisis, as if we don't know what the root causes are. Like it's actively working against the American ideals, which, yeah, it's not just that they're not true Americans, it's that they're actively anti-American.
Exactly.
You really home in on this on the 2024 election in your book, and you and I were discussing before we started filming just the fact that there really hasn't been a reckoning for the things that we saw during that last campaign season. I completely agree. I mean, a lot of it obviously related to anti-Trump lawfare, and not just Trump, but anybody who associated with Trump, Republicans in general. A lot of it also had to do with the corporate media just lying through their teeth. We have not faced a reckoning for that. I'm curious if you think we ever will, what it would take to do that, and also just specifically the things that you think we need to see a reckoning for from the 2024 election.
Right. If there's really one thing I want out of this book, as I want it to serve as just a reminder and a full accounting for just the insanity and outright, again, anti-American tendencies that we saw from Democrats, and just as you said, second to nobody is the corporate media.
Mm-hmm.
And it started with the lying by the press, where the just that you could come out and say that inflation was not a problem. You could say, in fact, it was actually good. A lot of you saw headlines were like, "This is why inflation's actually good for you and good for the country."
Mm-hmm.
um, Come out and say that, well, the border crossings are going down now, so that's not a problem anymore. They just flipped on a dime in 2024, all for the purpose of winning an election. But of course, we saw more extreme things. We saw the lawfare waged against Donald Trump. It was first attempting to bankrupt him, attempting to imprison him. Then there's an assassination attempt. He's actually shot. Another assassination attempt. Kamala Harris, who everybody in Washington knew, everyone in Washington knew that she was a joke. You read the articles about just the incompetence of the staff, the mismanagement, how she was constantly complaining, her senior staff members constantly complaining about the portfolio of positions she got. She becomes the nominee. Again, on a dime, the media says, this is Brat Summer. There has never been someone more popular than Kamala Harris. Allowed her to switch her position on every single thing that she ever said, and just explained it away, said it was fine. She goes in front of cameras in the twilight of the campaign at her official residency as, as the vice president, and calls Donald Trump a fascist. She did everything but declare him an enemy of the state. This is their main political opponent. And when did this become okay? Of course, all along that period of time, as we're watching them try to zero out, physically harm this man, or imprison him, or bankrupt him, they're calling him, they're talking about what his plans are for retribution when he gets in office, and he plans on weaponizing the Justice Department. This is just, again, a period of time that I really do not feel that we have fully confronted. We can't be reminded enough of it, and we have to say these are people, and really take seriously when you're talking with your friends, when you're talking with family about the next election as it comes around the corner. These are people that you have the choice. Are you going to put them in power again? Are we going to go through that again? Are we going to see that? Because to the extent we've seen retribution in this country against all the people who affected that, it's been pretty tame. What, Jimmy Kimmel just lost his TV show. Some other people, they lose their security clearances. I mean, they talk about this as if that's the end of the world. No, they actually were trying to imprison this person. They did it to so many of his supporters, the legal harassment. So again, as people talk about the next election, it's coming fast. You really have to remember about all the things that we just went through.
Right, right. The cognitive dissonance is truly so wild. And we talk a lot at the Federalist about how it's not just hypocrisy. It is that, but it's not just hypocrisy, it's hierarchy. It's we can do this thing to you. You cannot do this thing to me. It is rules for me, not for thee. And specifically when it comes to the media, but for the Democrat Party broadly, their whole shtick is don't believe your lying eyes about anything, about crime, inflation, about anything, truly anything. You detail a bunch of them in your book. I mean, it's also boys pretending to be girls and girls pretending to be boys. Like you can't say reality. It's a lie after lie after lie. And I think a lot of the reason for that is that Democrats cannot succeed in reality, which is why the media have to spin all of these things as different than they actually are. Because if Democrats are actually held to account for what they've done, they would never win again. Like they would never win an election. They would never get anybody on their side. And you write in your book also that they can't win arguments if they can't control who's allowed to speak. And I think that's a really good key point too, because censorship is another huge part. It's not just the lying, it's preventing other people from telling the truth and correcting the record, which is a huge problem.
Right. And what I think you just said it perfectly, that they cannot succeed in reality. And the reality of it is that they are, I wanted to be sure that I was not oversimplifying or speaking in a way that seemed so flippant that people wouldn't believe me. I've cut this every way I can. The reality is it's an anti-American party. And part of that, a big reason for that, is they hold this they hold the most un-American view that we are all created equal. That they completely reject that view. Because why did they believe in the hierarchy that you were just speaking about? Because they truly believe, as you said again so perfectly, that they should be able to do certain things. And all these other people who, if they're not rich, if they're not close to the government, if they are not the state as well, they don't get to have those things. They don't get to do whatever they want. They don't get to. It's as simple as things like air traveling should only be for them. They say things like this a lot. You remember it during COVID. You remember it. I think that COVID was a really crystallizing time for a lot of people on this very concept, because during COVID, when you caught one of the Democrats, whether it was Gavin Newsom going to a restaurant, Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot going to get a haircut, someone going to the gym when gyms were shut down, Nancy Pelosi going to a salon when the salons were cut down in her city in San Francisco. You caught them, and what did they say? Well, Lori Lightfoot says, well, I'm a public-facing person. I have to look good. You have Gavin Newsom says, well, as a leader, I should probably be providing a better example for people. Well, no, you actually should just be not doing the thing that you said is putting people at risk and putting lives at risk. People going to the gym and saying, well, I actually, I have to maintain my physics, because all of it just goes. And this was a little bit different, but former Secretary of State, former Senator John Kerry, one time he was asked, why does he, when he goes to these climate junkets where they're talking about the need to reduce climate change, why do you always fly private? And he said, someone like me can't fly, public, commercial travel. What they're saying is, I'm important, I'm special, I'm different from you. I get to do those things. You don't get to do those things. And not only do I get to do them, I get to do them on your dime. You get to provide the money, the security, the travel, all the airfare, everything. They genuinely believe that we are not all created equal. They reject that. They completely reject it. Anti-American.
Yes. Where do you think that anti-Americanism comes from, or when do you think it started? Like, do you think this is a result of, we're not all created equal and they got there because they stopped believing in like the sanctity of life? Or is it an issue with like, we can't believe in American ideals because we have to throw away our entire history because it's irredeemably racist? Or does it have to do with them just trying to import voters from afar, so they have to like pretend that America isn't that special because they need to bring people in from elsewhere? Tim Kaine just said that our rights don't come from God, they come from government, and that it's like wrong and horrific to say that they come from God. I mean, these are like you say, blatantly anti-American ideals, but when did they start? Where did they come from? Like, why are the Democrats as radical on this as they are now?
That is such a good question. And admittedly, I was with this book, I wanted to prove it with reminding people of everything that we've gone through. So it's really hammered away that theme of just Democrats rejecting the fundamental pro-American patriotic views that you and I share. They do not share. However, I will say, with what just happened with Charlie Kirk, has that the idea you're talking about has been something I've been thinking about over the last week. And it really seems to me that we live in a world, and it's kind of what everything about our politics has become about right now, which is there are people in this country who they're trying to do good, trying to help people, trying to bring some good to this world. And then there are the people who want to take them down, and they do it out of spite, envy, resentment. That's the dichotomy I'm seeing, because you try to make sense of it. And why would anybody do the things they do? Why
Mhm.
would they do any of the things you and I are just now talking about that are in my book? And it just seems to be that there really are just two different types of people right now in this moment in our politics: the people who are trying to do good in this world, trying to help people, and then the people who want to bring them down. It almost seems like there's just, and I suppose there's just this fundamental difference of world outlook, because you'd have to look at what animates someone to say, well, I'm able to go air travel and it should be free and it should be cheap, and while everyone's home on lockdown, I should be able to go get a haircut, but not you. You can't do
Mhm.
that. It just
Mhm.
all I see there is spite and envy and resentment.
Mhm. Yeah, I remember reading years ago, Thomas Sowell's book, A Conflict of Visions, and just really feeling like I had a better understanding of like what exactly the left was trying to do and why there's so much conflict, because they're looking for utopia and we are not. Like it's understanding the constraints of human nature or not understanding the constraints of human nature, and not that that's not still relevant, because those are just like immutable human truths. But I think we're so far past just having two conflicting visions of what the future of America is, because it's not about two people or two parties or two groups like wanting a different version of America. It's one group wanting America and the other group not wanting America. And it really reminds me a lot, like especially in the wake of the Charlie Kirk assassination. I've been thinking a lot about this, just um like the iconoclasm of the left and how much of that I think has gotten us to this point. Like just a couple of years ago, it was tearing down statues and monuments, and now it's tearing down people. And I was just watching these college students, people honoring Charlie Kirk's memory by creating these beautiful murals and memorials on their college campuses and elsewhere. And then you have these insane leftists who are not only delighting and celebrating the murder of Charlie Kirk, but they're going and they're destroying the memorials to him. They're covering them in paint. They're drawing, Hitler mustaches on him. They're doing all of these horrific things. And it's just like, I think we at our peril excuse the iconoclasm of the past few years, because I do think that has a big part to do with how we got to this anti-American sentiment and anti-life sentiment, as we saw last week also.
Yeah, and just to show you how like when I wrote this book, it was because I was sensing something new here.
Hmm.
This is a different thing that what even just 10 years ago, the debates that we were having during the Obama years, even when I was a very, very young adult, the Bush years, very different. The way that Democrats express their disagreements. It used to be, I was thinking about this last night. It used to be if you were a liberal leftist Democrat, you would go online and you would go in the comments section of like the Huffington Post, and you tended to do it anonymously. You didn't have your face picture, you didn't have your name.
Hmm.
You wrote some kind of nasty comment, and that's it. Or you might do it a little bit. Few years later, you could do it on Twitter, but still, it was an anonymous name, no picture. You had your private Facebook. You might say it. You might have your name. You might have your face, but it was only people you knew seeing you. But now you've got people on Twitter and more, I think, severely, people on TikTok. That's your face. That's your
Hmm.
name. And you're
Yes.
going on there laughing about just a man who just got shot in front of, by the way, and this hasn't been said enough. There were young children who went there and they were doing the right thing, which is exposing themselves to different ideas. They want to hear debate. They want to hear open dialogue. This is how this country works. This is how democracy in action works. We have discussions. We compete with ideas. An
Hmm.
11-year-old goes there, and what does she see? She sees a man get shot in the neck. Why would she ever want to participate in this ever again? But
Hmm.
then you got the people who go on TikTok and they laugh about it and say he deserved it. They go on their open Facebooks and they're saying these things. This is not the way it used to be. So when I talk
Hmm.
about the collapse into anti-American filth, this is what I'm talking about. That
Hmm.
party has collapsed, and that's new.
Yes, yes. You write this line in your book. I wrote it down. That the Democrats sell to the American people is, quote, do as we say and nobody gets hurt. And obviously, you wrote this book before the Charlie Kirk assassination. This has been something that's been implicit for a while. And I think of the way the media did this, for instance, with Nick Sandmann or other people that they tried to cancel or ruin their lives. You know, if you dissented from the Democrat Party, they would find a way to ruin your life, even normie Americans. And just the way that, you know, it used to be implicit, it used to be just by the like Democrat machine, but now it's individual Americans making this threat. Do as we say, and nobody gets hurt. That's just absolutely horrific and quite scary for normie Americans and people who believe things like you and I believe. I
Real
want
quick
to hit, yeah,
on that
yeah,
point though, that's not much different than what the entire year of 2020 was. What was
yes,
2020
yes.
if not like a hostage situation? Because I was in DC actually I think you were in DC at the time too, weren't you, 2020? Or had you left?
Part of 2020, yeah. I was going back and forth between Wisconsin and DC, but yeah,
Okay, gotcha. So I was still there, total ghost town because all the storefronts and everything in downtown had been boarded up because what you had every single night was the hordes of people going out, and you saw this in every other country was just the threats and actual violence and vandalism and the looting and the rioting. And that was all because we're heading into an election and we're going to show you we're going to burn this place down if we don't get what we want. And just when in DC the that had kind of calmed down. It had kind of simmered a bit. They had started taking down because the lockdowns had kind of relaxed a little bit. They started taking down the boards and everything from the window. Leading up to the election, DC, the most liberal city we have in this country in terms of like per capita how they vote. They all vote Democrat. Everyone who lives there is a Democrat, unless you're coming in to work for a Republican administration or work for
right.
some Republican leaning think tank. You're a Democrat. So they all those storefronts heading into the election day in 2020, all the boards go right back up, and that's not because Joe Biden might have won and a bunch of Trump supporters were going to come out. Eventually, we ended up seeing some weeks later what happened, but those went up because it was in case a Trump one happened. If Trump was
Yes.
one, we read the threat. We got the message.
Yes, the exact same thing happened in Madison, Wisconsin. And the part of 2020 that I was back in Wisconsin for included the riots in Kenosha, which I was on the ground for. And the exact same thing happened here. It did not matter. Like, it was definitely occurring in blue, left wing, you know, enclaves like DC, but it was also happening across the Midwest. I mean, it started in Minneapolis, which obviously is blue. But like the Midwest was another huge hotbed for a lot of these riots. And yeah, it was a complete hostage situation. That's a really good way to put it. I want to pivot just a little bit because there's this awesome personal story at the end of the first chapter of your book where you talk about your Mexican mother and her assimilation and your cultural identity and her cultural identity. And I would just love if you would tell our viewers about that.
Yeah, and I will tell you, these are like always they're not my least favorite parts to write of any book, but you're encouraged because lots of people want to talk about you as personally as an author. They are kind of difficult because I'm not used to it. But no, I wanted to include in there because I do, it definitely applies to the book. It definitely applies to everything that's in the book. Yeah, like my mother, she's a literal Mexican immigrant. She came here when she was around, I think, 12 years old, was nationalized when she was in her 20s. That would have been in the 80s under the Reagan administration. And just she's someone I've thought of my whole life in terms of, especially when I wrote a book called Privileged Victims that just had to do with the culture of victimhood and how if you can claim to have some kind of gender identity or racial grievance, you're somehow supposed to advance. That's supposed to be your ticket to the top. Like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, well, I'm entitled to that job because someone needs to make up for the fact that I've been aggrieved based on my gender identity, sexual
Right.
identity, racial identity. So I think about her a lot because that never occurred to me. I'm half Mexican, I'm half white, I'm gay, and yet it never occurred to me to say I've been denied opportunities, I've been oppressed, and I deserve something for that. I'm
Mm-hmm.
entitled to something for that. And I really and I get it from both of my parents, but from my mother, I think about it a lot because she's an actual immigrant, and she's really funny to talk to. She had a whole evolution with coming around to Donald Trump. Now she's like the biggest like Donald Trump supporter, loves him. But just growing up, she didn't teach us Spanish. Neither my sister and I Spanish. She speaks fluent Spanish, but she didn't teach us. And there were various reasons she would give throughout the years when you would ask her. But I remember asking her one time, what like why didn't you teach us Spanish? And I'm not going to say exactly what she said, but it was if I had taught you Spanish, you would have ended up basically saying we would have ended up kind of like lowlives, was how she kind of put it. And she thought we would, but the gist of it was that we wouldn't properly assimilate as Americans. She
Right,
truly
right.
believed that, and I repeated it back to her to make sure I was getting this part of the book right. I said, "Do you remember saying that?" And she said, "And I stand by that." She said, "I stand by that." So that was pretty recent. I know that I was remembering that properly. But she still was very much into. She likes Mexican culture, but she does not. She's never waved Mexican flags. She, in fact, resents anybody who comes here and waves their flag. She'll make a comment about it every single time she sees it. She just thinks that you should not leave your country or enjoy all the benefits that this country
Hmm.
affords you, and like unlike anywhere else, and try to represent some other country.
Right.
So again, never taught us Spanish. When she would take me occasionally these like Mexican like cultural festivals and stuff that are in South Carolina where I grew up, it always felt very alien to me, just because that wasn't otherwise, even though I had this Mexican mother who listened to Mexican music, that just wasn't my life. But she's far more American, far more patriotic than any Democrat leader we have today. Just the complete opposite, and she really instilled that in me. And I view myself as just a complete uh, general American. I love that about myself. I love that
Hmm.
about my family, and I really appreciate that she instilled that in me.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. Well, it was a great part of the book. I really enjoyed it. And I'm sure all of you will enjoy it as well when you pick up a copy of Eddie's new book, Traitors, The Democrat Party's Collapse into Anti-American Filth. Eddie, I think they can get it now on Amazon. Is that correct?
Yeah, Amazon. There's the physical print copy you can get, and the ebook will be available any day now.
Okay. And if you don't want to patronize Amazon, where can people find your book elsewhere?
As of this moment, that's it. But if you find
Okay.
me on social media, I've got a Twitter, I've got an Instagram, I've got a TikTok. You can get in touch with me there, and I'll always be happy to figure out another way.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks so much for joining me today, Eddie. Great discussion, and I hope to have you back again soon.
Sounds good.
I'm so curious. What are the half a dozen people who watched late night television going to do now that Stephen Colbert and Jimmy Kimmel are off the air? If you didn't hear, Jimmy Kimmel's show was pulled off the air by ABC for his disgusting and dishonest comments about the Charlie Kirk assassination, wherein he perpetuated the propaganda that the killer was part of the MAGA gang.
We hit some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them, and doing everything they can to score political points from it.
Now, of course, this was after we knew about the assassin's leftist bullet engravings, the fact that he had reportedly adopted hateful leftist views over the past few years, and the fact that his roommate is also his transgender identifying lover. There's really no mystery here about motive, as much as the Democrats would like to pretend there is. Now, Kimmel's comments could easily be considered a violation of FCC rules, since he knew the information was false, or at least he should have. The broadcasting of the false information directly causes substantial public harm, and it was foreseeable that broadcasting the lies would cause such harm. Which, a guy just got assassinated in part for being part of the MAGA gang. So FCC Chairman Brendan Carr rightly noticed, and ABC pulled Jimmy Kimmel Live off the air. Good riddance. Jimmy Kimmel is the absolute worst. Let's just take a little walk down memory lane. Here's Jimmy Kimmel saying that people who didn't get the COVID shot deserve to die.
Hospitals get any more overcrowded, they're going to have to make some very tough choices about who gets an ICU bed. That choice doesn't seem so tough to me. Vaccinated person having a heart attack? Yes, come right on in. We'll take care of you. Unvaccinated guy who gobbled horse goo? Rest in peace, Wheezy.
And here's Jimmy cheering on the firing of Tucker Carlson from Fox News.
That's right. Fox News has severed bow ties with Tucker Carlson. After all these years, they are parting ways, which means he was fired. Tucker couldn't be reached for comment. He's already on a plane to Moscow to meet with his manager. But what a shock. I mean, what an absolutely delightful shock this is. The good news is now Tucker can spend more time at home tanning his testicles and touching himself to that sexy green M&M. Sadly, he's probably not done poisoning old people's brains. The question now is, where will he do it next? Will he go to OAN? Will he go to Newsmax? Will he crawl back up Satan's fiery beehole from whence he came? We don't know. But wherever he goes, we thought it right to celebrate his departure with a look back at where he went. So here now, to send him off In style, we give you one last dance with one of the most despicable mother tuckers ever to appear on American television.
So spare me the crocodile tears. But of course, Democrats and principled conservatives are irate. This is censorship. This is cancel culture. Free speech. Conservatives are hypocrites. What a bunch of garbage. First of all, this isn't a MAGA FCC chair going off the rails to threaten ABC. This is a rule that's already on the books, and Carr and other conservatives are finally just saying, enough is enough. We're going to enforce this. Second of all, free speech is an important part of our self-government and the First Amendment, but so is freedom of association. And ABC and any other employer is more than welcome to stop associating with somebody who publicly and perpetually lies in the way that Jimmy Kimmel does, and especially in the wake of such a horrific thing as an assassination. Finally, this should be obvious. This is not cancel culture. You know what's cancel culture? Deciding you don't like somebody and then digging through their social media posts from a decade ago to find something that you find distasteful to ruin their life. And this is something that far too many Americans have experienced, and they've been fired, or they've been doxxed, or they've been put on blast online, or they've been made to lose friends, or they've lost scholarships, or had their college acceptances yanked, blah, blah, blah. And on it goes. And in many of these cases, the distasteful thing they've said has just been the truth, has just been a normal conservative opinion, like, hey, boys can't become girls, or marriage is between one man and one woman, or COVID lockdowns and so-called vaccines don't work to stop the spread. Canceled, canceled, canceled. What we're seeing now with Jimmy Kimmel and taxpayer-funded school teachers and doctors and pilots and so on is called consequences for actions. It's called ramifications in real time. It's called accountability. You don't get to cheer when a civilian dad gets shot in the neck and then expect your patients to trust that your Hippocratic oath means jack squat. I'm sorry, but I don't think anyone should be expected to trust their life with a psycho like that. You don't get to laugh maniacally in response to a dad being assassinated and then continue to teach other people's little children. No, you can't be gleeful when your fellow American dies and then expect to be trusted to fly your fellow citizens around for American Airlines. And you don't get to spread dangerous propaganda every weeknight and expect not to eventually get fired. That is not cancel culture. That is called moving the Overton window back where it belongs. Democrats canceled conservatives for saying things that were true. Now we're canceling them for spreading blatant lies that are deliberately designed to incite people to kill my friends and me. We are not the same. All right, everybody, that's going to do it for me today. Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of the Kylee Cast. I'm Kylee Griswold, and I will be right back here next week with more. Don't miss it.